You're sitting in a waiting room. No phone, no book, no screen of any kind. 3 minutes pass and you're already restless. You start reading the fine print on a safety poster. You study the ceiling tiles. You reorganize the contents of your pockets just to have something to do. We call this boredom. We treat it like a malfunction. Something to be fixed, filled, optimized away with content and noise and stimulation delivered at a rate that would have been incomprehensible to any human who ever lived before about 1995. But here's the thing. Ancient humans had entire afternoons with nothing scheduled. No tasks, no obligations, no notifications. Just time. Unstructured, unoptimized, accountable to nobody time. And what they did with it turns out to be one of the most revealing things we know about our species. Let's establish something first. Ancient humans were not busy in the way you are busy. Anthropological studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups, the closest living approximation of prehistoric human life, consistently show that survival activities consumed roughly 15 to 20 hours per week. That left enormous stretches of time that needed filling. Not occasionally, every single day. So the question isn't whether ancient humans experienced downtime. They absolutely did. The question is what happened inside it. In 2017, evolutionary psychologist Adriana Mih published research examining leisure behavior across multiple hunter-gatherer societies. What she found wasn't random. Across completely different cultures, different continents, different environments, the same categories of behavior appeared during unstructured time with striking consistency, as though the activities weren't chosen so much as surfaced. As though boredom wasn't a problem humans solved differently. It was a problem humans solved the same way, every time, everywhere. The pattern, once you see it, looks less like coincidence and more like biology. The first thing ancient humans did with free time was talk, not the transactional exchange of information you do in a meeting or a text thread. Real conversation, extended, unhurried, going now here in particular talk. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner's recordings of the Jew Hansi show that during daylight downtime, conversation was loose and wandering. People moved between topics without agenda. They gossiped. They rehashed old arguments. They discussed people who weren't present in elaborate detail. This wasn't idle behavior. It was social maintenance, the invisible labor of keeping relationships functional and alliances intact. In a world with no legal system, no police, no written contracts, the only thing standing between you and disaster was whether the people around you liked and trusted you enough to help when things went wrong. So you talked, constantly, skillfully, for hours. Psychologist Robin Dunbar at Oxford has argued that human language itself may have evolved specifically for this purpose. Not to communicate information, but to manage social bonds at scale. Gossip, in his framing, is the original killer app. Ancient humans weren't wasting time talking about nothing. They were doing the most important work their species ever developed. But talk eventually runs out, and something else took over. This is where it gets genuinely surprising. They played, not metaphorically, not casually. Deliberately, enthusiastically, with rules and stakes and the full competitive engagement you recognize from any game you've ever cared about losing. Archaeological evidence of gaming is extraordinarily old. Dice-like objects carved from animal bones have been found at sites dating back over 8,000 years. Board game grids etched into stone surfaces appear across ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and India, some predating written language entirely. The royal game of discovered in a Sumerian tomb, dates to roughly 400-600 years ago and came with playing pieces and what researchers believe are the original rules. Someone cared enough about that game to bury it with a king. But the games that left no archaeological trace are equally telling. The Hadza play a throwing game with sticks and stones that requires no manufactured equipment and leaves no evidence. Children across hunter-gatherer societies play elaborate chase and hiding games that mirror the cognitive demands of actual hunting. Adults gamble. They bet on outcomes, compete in tests of strength and accuracy, argue about the results with the same energy humans have always brought to caring too much about games. Play, it turns out, is not a childhood behavior humans grow out of. It is a species behavior that emerges automatically whenever survival pressure eases and time becomes available. Then there was music. And this one matters more than the others, because of what making music actually requires. A 40-season-year-old flute carved from a vulture bone, was discovered in a German cave in 2008. 5 finger holes, precisely spaced. Whoever made it understood pitch. They understood that specific intervals produce specific emotional responses in human listeners. They practiced until they could produce those intervals reliably. Then they played, presumably for an audience sitting around a fire with nothing else demanding their attention, experiencing something we would recognize immediately as entertainment. Singing almost certainly predates instruments by hundreds of thousands of years. It leaves no archaeological trace, but every known human culture sings, every single one. No exceptions. Ethnomusicologist Joseph Jordania has argued this near universality points to singing as a biological behavior, not a cultural invention, something built into humans the same way walking is built into humans. You don't choose to find music moving. You're constructed that way. Dancing almost certainly accompanied the singing, and storytelling accompanied both. The fire, the music, the movement, the narrative, they weren't separate activities. They were one activity with different components, happening simultaneously. Filling the hours between sunset and sleep with something that was simultaneously entertainment, cultural transmission, and social bonding. Ancient humans weren't passively bored. They were the entertainment. Now, some of you are thinking, this sounds pleasant, but somewhat purposeless. What's the point of games and gossip and singing if it doesn't produce anything? Fair question, and the answer is more direct than you might expect. It produced humans. Specifically, it produced the cognitive and social capacities that made humans the most effective species on the planet. Play behavior in children builds the problem-solving flexibility needed for adult decision-making under pressure. Competitive games develop strategic thinking in risk-free environments. Music and dance synchronize groups neurologically, producing what researchers call entrainment, a measurable alignment of brain states across individuals that increases cooperation and trust more reliably than almost any other activity. Storytelling transmits survival knowledge across generations without formal education. Gossip enforces social norms without written law. None of it looked productive. All of it was essential. And then, because humans cannot leave interesting things alone, they made things. Objects with no practical necessity, purely because they could. Perforated shell beads found in Blombos Cave in South Africa date back 100,000 years. The nearest coastline was 20 kilometers away. Someone walked that distance, selected specific shells, carried them back to camp, and spent hours carefully drilling holes through them with stone tools. Not for food, not for shelter, to look good, to signal something about who they were to the people around them. Ochre, a reddish pigment, appears at human sites across Africa dating back over 3,000 years, far older than any cave painting. Researchers believe it was used to decorate bodies and objects long before it was used to decorate walls. Humans were designing their appearance before they developed agriculture, before they built permanent structures, before they invented writing. This urge to make things beautiful, to decorate, to signal identity through objects, appears so early and so universally that archaeologists now treat it as a marker of behavioral modernity. The moment humans started making unnecessary things with care and intention is the moment the archaeological record starts looking recognizably human. Boredom, it turns out, is built civilization, not the structured, mandatory labor of farming and industry, the unstructured, purposeless. Nobody asked me to afternoons of people with time in hands and the specifically human inability to leave the world exactly as they found it. Today you carry a device specifically engineered by some of the most sophisticated behavioral scientists alive to ensure you never experience an uninterrupted moment of boredom again. It works. You are never truly bored. You are never truly unstimulated. And something about that should concern you more than it does. Ancient humans sat with empty hours and filled them from the inside. With games they invented, music they made, stories they told, objects they decorated for no reason except that beauty felt worth making. They didn't need a platform to suggest what to do next. They already knew. You make things when you find time after the content. They made things because the time was already there. You consume stories built by strangers behind screens. They told stories to faces lit by fire, about people they knew, in a language that belonged entirely to their group, in a tradition that would die completely if they stopped telling it. You play games designed by corporations, optimized for engagement metrics. They played games they invented themselves, with rules that bent to the people playing them, in competitions where the loser had to sit beside the winner for the rest of their lives. We are not a different species. We carry exactly the same drives toward play, story, music, beauty, and connection that filled every unscheduled afternoon for 300,000 years. We just stopped leaving afternoons unscheduled.